Welcome to the Resilient Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Doug Kachijian, and today I'm joined by the Funk brothers, Jake and Josh. Jake Funk is a running back prospect in the 2021 National Football League draft class. Despite tearing the same ACL in successive seasons at the University of Maryland, Jake ranked first in the Big Ten and second among all Football Bowl subdivision running backs in yards per carry in 2020. He was named third team All-Big Ten before declaring for the NFL Draft. He ran a 4.43 40-yard dash and vertical jumped 38 inches at the Maryland Pro Day. Josh Funk is a former Division I and professional lacrosse player. He currently serves as CEO of Rehab to Perform, a physical therapy practice in the greater Baltimore area at the forefront of healthcare innovation, progressive business operations, strategic growth, and clinical excellence. Josh helped Jake rehabilitate his knee after both of his knee surgeries, so I wanted to get them on the podcast here to discuss their personal and professional relationship and how they kind of balance that dynamic. We also talked to Josh about some of his debrief items from both of those rehabs, and it really spoke to the multidisciplinary nature of the rehabilitation process and how all of the key stakeholders need to be on the same page communication-wise. And talking to Josh, the primary debrief item really, from his standpoint, was communication. And as medical providers and performance specialists, we often focus on kind of the tactical objectives. And in the case of something like ACL rehab, it might be things like quad strength and range of motion and running and change of direction progressions. But Josh seemed pretty adamant about the fact that he thinks that Jake's success the second time, as opposed to the first time, was really contingent upon communication among the medical staff at the University of Maryland, the coaching staff, and how just because of some various circumstances at Maryland after Jake's first rehabilitation, the communication wasn't as seamless as it was the second time. After that, we kind of got into with Jake, what it was like from just a psychological and a confidence standpoint to rehabilitate two ACLs in successive years, and what it was like for him, especially in a COVID-shortened season after he'd basically missed 2 seasons in a row with ACL injuries. He essentially had 4 games in the 2020 season before he declared for the draft to distinguish himself and make himself a viable draft prospect. So he really made the most of his opportunities, and he's really a testament to just willpower and belief in oneself. And it seemed like despite having these injuries, his confidence never really wavered. All right, I've got Jake and Josh Funk here, the Funk brothers. I appreciate both of you guys coming on. I wanted to begin by maybe asking Jake what the last few weeks, months have been like going through that pre-draft process, no combine. So that's kind of changed the way that teams evaluate players. So maybe Jake, and we're going to kind of bounce around chronologically, but if you could just speak to maybe, from the time that you made the decision to go pro and then up until till now and that pre-draft workout that you just had, what the training entailed and your thought process as far as like deciding to go pro.
Yeah. So, from the day that I decided to go pro, the next step was to decide on an agent. And that was a, pretty long process that took a couple weeks. Me and my family were, interviewing, multiple agencies, multiple agents. And, we found one that, we really liked and one guy that I trust, a lot. So after that, we decided on a place to train for the combine, which later got canceled. But we decided to go down to Florida, in Aventura, Florida, which is North Miami. And we went to Bommarito's Performance Systems down there. So my training per se from January 2nd till February 28th was all combine specific training. So it was very, very, detail oriented, almost like a track workouts every single day. We were working on the 40-yard dash, broad jump, vertical jump, bench press, the short shuttle that they have you do, as well as the L cone, where, the big events that I was training for. And my training was very, very, very specific. It was very, detail oriented in technique, whether that was in the weight room or on the field. It was very, very rigorous. It was 6 days a week. I'd get into the facility at 6:30 in the morning, wouldn't leave till about between 1 and 3:30 every day. And, for what, 8 weeks. So did that, put me on a full meal plan, full supplement plan. Was able to live a mile away from the beach, which is amazing. And, from there came back on February 28th. And then there was like a 10-day prep for pro day, which was what each and every school does every year. But now that the combine got canceled this year, became more important. Pro day is just another opportunity to run all those events that I was talking about, as well as perform running back drills for me specifically in front of NFL scouts. So the 10 days that I came home leading up to my pro day, from February 28th to March 10th, I was, going through a taper period, they called it, for my training. Because, a big thing about track athletes is you want to be able to peak at the right time. You never see sprinters peaking their times in the prelims. And that's what I was told throughout my whole training process, was that, you're going to continue to get better, but don't think you're peaking right now. We're trying to peak you at your pro day instead of the training day when we'd test our times and stuff. So that 10-day block was a peaking period where, we lightened up the load, but still got used to like running on the turf at Maryland, those kind of things. March 10th hit, that was my pro day. Crushed that day, pretty much could not have a better performance there. And then from there, the last week or so, since then, has all been, interviews with teams. I'm getting ready to go through medical examinations with teams as well. And, really, starting the mental side of the process when it comes to football IQ and talking with these coaches about the game, more so than the physical side.
Yeah, thanks for that background. And I'm just curious because you're an athlete, but also I think you have a personal interest in strength and conditioning and rehab just because of your family relationship that we'll get into with Josh. And you've had access to really good coaches, really good medical providers. But a lot of times, people like you who have this extensive background make really impressive gains when they go to these pre-combine programs. So for you, like what was maybe something different that you did that you hadn't done before? Was it that you were learning like maybe how to run in a different way, how to train in a different way? Or was it more the fact that like you had nothing to do but focus on the physical component of the game? There was no practice, there was no academic stress. Like what do you think was the differentiator in terms of you making that amazing progress that you made?
Well, I think what you said there at the end, where it was like I didn't have anything else to do. I was a full-time athlete from the time I woke up till the time I went to bed. My focus was to literally get my body in peak performance, in a position to peak in terms of performance. And that, itself was great. They focused a lot on like explosive movements in the weight room, but also not loading like the bar heavy and like trying to power lift. It was all bar speed movements that I thought was really cool. We had, a little gauge on the bar that measured the speed of it in terms of, and we would use chains, we'd use bands, we'd use a lot of different modalities that I wasn't necessarily accustomed to, going through like a regular college strength training program. And, being able to, be a full-time athlete. So it wasn't just training as well that went on there. There was full PT on staff. There was full chiropractors, full-time massage therapists that you'd get, into as soon as you stepped off the field from working out. You got right on the massage bed and they flushed you out right afterward. So I think it was just a combination of all these different modalities that you were able to have at your disposal, as well as being a full-time athlete mentally.
Yeah, and we've had a bunch of like people with track and field backgrounds on this podcast, and they're probably salivating hearing that you trained like an athlete and took kind of that speed-based approach to your combine prep. In terms of like, I know that every week's a little bit different, but how did they structure the training in terms of like which days are you sprinting, which days you lifting? Because obviously you've got kind of you're doing change of direction work. You've got a lot of boxes to check and only so many days. And obviously you can't train with, maximal intensity every day. So just conceptually, how did they kind of break that down?
So I'll just break down the week. So Monday, you'd come in, and Mondays and Thursdays were your long days. So Monday, you came in, you would do like pre-workout stuff like PT, massage at 7 a.m. At 8:15, you get on the field and you do agility work. Some days they would structure it where you did more aggressive agility work. Some days you did more light agility work that you would, jog through, just get the footwork down, that kind of stuff. You take a little break after that for an hour, come back onto the field. At 11 or so, you do running back specific drills for an hour. That would take you to around 12. Then from 12 to 1:15 was lunch. And then from there, at 1:15, you started 40-yard dash work. And on Mondays and Thursdays, it was more so working on your start, the first 10 yards. It was nothing crazy in terms of speed where, you put a lot of stress on your muscles. And then after that 40-yard dash starts, you'd get into upper body lifts to finish the day from like 2:30 to 3:30. You'd come back in on Tuesday. Very similar morning. You'd have, your pre-workout stuff that you do in the PT rooms, massage therapist rooms, that kind of deal. And then at 8:15 to about 9:45, 10 o'clock, it was more of your acceleration, your speed day. So it was more of an intense morning. And then after that, you'd go to lunch. You would have, light lower body lift with corrective exercises mixed in there in the afternoon, and then you went home. Wednesday was more of your recovery day, let's say. You'd get there early. They had us doing Wonderlicks in the morning instead of PT to do the IQ test that they would do at the combine. Then at 9 o'clock, you'd get into the pool. We do like a little pool workout as like a recovery workout. Just get in there and, do a lot of the drills that we would do on the field, but, obviously in a pool where it takes your body weight off you a little bit. And then Thursday, the same exact schedule as Monday. Friday, the same exact schedule as Tuesday. And then Saturday was you came in, you got upper body lift. They mixed in a little bit of lower body, and then they did like body comp testing. As well as, massage and medicals, whatever you had that day that was scheduled for you. So that was kind of the structure of the week from Monday through Saturday, and then Sunday would be your off day.
Got it. And then, Josh, how hard was it for you to watch Jake going through all this? And I know that you've been very involved with this athletic development. Now you've got to just, trust other people, albeit very competent people. Like, how hard was it for you to kind of watch this from afar? I'm sure you were chomping at the bit to get somewhat involved, right?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, he's working with Pete Bomarito, who has, 15 to 20, maybe even 20 plus years of combine experience. One of the reasons I think Jake was at least relatively comfortable with going down there was hearing from teammates and other people who had heard of how well things went for them when they were training with Pete. So at the end of the day, I try to stay in my lane. So as much as I enjoy working with him and just spending time with him, recognizing that there are much, much better people for what he needed at that given time, I think is, it's important. There are times where we need to sit back and let people that have done things that we haven't done, have had experiences that we haven't had, do their work. And overall, I mean, the proof is in the pudding. When I can just say when he hit that 38-inch vertical jump, after that, I pretty much knew how the rest of the day was going to go, because Jake, correct me if I'm wrong, but that was a PR. I mean, it was a day full of, I think there were 2 other PRs that day. You couldn't have asked for a better situation for him.
Yeah. I mean, that's cool of you to say. And we haven't really gotten into the context of the work that you've done with Jake, but yeah, I think Jake, if they ever have like a running back dunk contest, like you might be one of the front runners with that vert, right?
Yeah. I mean, I would definitely be confident with that. I mean, they matched it up with a bunch of other running backs that, came before me. And,
So you can throw down then.
I honestly, since I've torn my ACL, I haven't really stepped foot on a basketball court.
Okay.
Since then, just out of my own personal, like, just fear.
Right. Yeah.
But I think so with, the hops that I was able to show. I would hope that I could throw it down a little bit.
Yeah. And so you mentioned, the ACL piece, because prior to that, people might think, oh, this is just a normal, normal running back going through the pre-combine process. But you tore your ACL not once but twice. So maybe let's get into the first time. How did you tear it the first time? And just like even that initial, just the psychological aspect of going through that, and like maybe that initial sort of mourning period, so to speak, and then like how you just kind of like switch gears and said, okay, like now I've got to get back on the field, and what that was like for you.
I mean, so the first time was in November of 2018. We were playing against Ohio State, and was running down the field, and my knee buckled on me. It buckled inside, felt a pop. It wasn't really, too painful, per se. I just fell and got up, jogged off the field. Wasn't in too much pain at all, to be honest with you. Got off the field, was on the sidelines, like, my knee just doesn't feel right. Tried to put on a brace, tried to run a little bit, try to cut a couple times, but it just didn't feel right. So really I pulled myself out of the game. Didn't let myself go back in because I just knew something was wrong. Got an MRI the following day. Was told, by our training staff that I tore my ACL. Obviously, pretty devastating. The first time, especially, because you just don't know what it's like, what's going to happen, whether or not you're going to ever be the same again. So yeah, I mean, the first week or so was definitely, very, very mentally hard. I mean, I was mentally challenging, for me. But I was, very blessed to have a support system like no other, like Josh and my parents, and my other brother, really, supported me through it, and, pretty much gave me the confidence that I would, be okay. And, really, gave me some mental strength, really, to initially get over that little, the mourning period, I guess you could call it. And then from there, had surgery, went into that first year, and it was, I'm very blessed to have my brother who's on here, be, a physical therapist, because I mean, really, he was able to push me in different ways that a lot of other people couldn't, just because he's my brother and he knows who I am on a personal side, and went through that process and came back, in flying colors, and felt great. Felt like I was playing some of the best ball, that I've been playing in 2019, and went from there. So
Yeah. And then were you on special teams the first time that you tore it? Was that
yeah,
on the
yes,
kickoff coverage? Okay.
yeah, kickoff, yep.
Okay. Yeah. And then Jake, for you, I mean, obviously this is your brother. He tears his ACL. There's, regardless of your relationship personally, I mean, in my opinion, there's few people as qualified as you to rehab an athlete like that, or members of your staff. But at the same time, because you probably care and are more personally invested than anybody else, that can be kind of a blessing and a curse. I mean, I know that like I haven't worked on family members in that capacity where I was doing a full ACL rehab, but how did you kind of balance that personal relationship and the professional relationship, where I feel like sometimes you can almost be too emotionally invested, but that emotional investment is also going to drive you to work harder and do more for Jake than probably anybody else. So what was that like for you, kind of like being a brother and a physical therapist, and kind of like wearing those two hats, personal and professional?
Yeah, man, I think it definitely can seem challenging from the outside looking in, but I think at the end of the day, we've had a pretty healthy relationship over the years, being able to spend a lot of time with him in a wide variety of different settings. I've coached him in sports. We've worked out together. He has rehabbed with me before. And to be quite honest, we enjoy each other on a social level as well. So I just think that you have so many different aspects of our lives in which there's connectivity there. So I think first and foremost, it allowed me to have empathy in that situation and really just kind of get on a level where first and foremost, this is my brother. This is somebody who I know on a deep level, obviously ever since he was born. I would say that I've made certain decisions in my life to continue to be involved with his life and to be connected to him. So, wanting more than anything for him to fulfill his lifelong dreams and his ambitions. So I don't think I thought of that dual role as much as, okay, this is somebody who I care a ton about. I want to do everything that I can to help him and to be a part of the process. So I know, once again, I mean, from the outside looking in, it can look like there's this kind of tug of war going on with regards to identity. But I think at the end of the day, we've had so many different touch points in multiple aspects of both he and my lives that it was relatively seamless.
Okay. Yeah. And I mean, basically you were just very mission focused. Like, this is somebody I care about. There's a job to do. Let's do it. And you're qualified to do it. So like, it wasn't much of a decision. I guess, can either of you speak to what the communication was like between, Josh and Rehab to Perform and the university? Like, how were you, like, Jake, were you doing things, were you going back and forth between Josh's facility and the team? Or was it kind of like, hey, you're going to rehab with Josh till you get to a certain point and then you're going to go back to school? What was that communication like?
So I would say there was a little less communication the first time than the second time. The second time, I mean, I would say the first time, there was like the school knew that I was working out with my brother, but there wasn't a lot of communication, I would say. But ultimately it was, I would tell, I would work out the school first, and then things that we didn't hit at school, I would come to Rehab to Perform and hit. When I was going through the whole process, I was doing multiple workouts a day. Starting out early in the morning at the University of Maryland, then driving up to one of Josh's locations. Right after that, to rehab with him a little bit more. And then I would drive back and do a little bit during, like, let's say practice something. I would, get some kind of another workout in. So I was constantly on the move. But when it came to communication, I think that really became a bigger, thing in the second process. Especially when we went into quarantine in the spring of 2020, because they weren't allowed to do any rehab at the University of Maryland. So Josh pretty much took over fully as my physical therapist, as well as had a couple of his other PTs help out with some of my other teammates who were rehabbing as well. Cool. I would say that the first go around there was less communication, more just they just recognized that I was working out with both. And the second go around, there was more, dialogue and more, connectivity on that piece.
Okay. And so tear ACL the first time, rehab, you're ready for, training camp the next season. And I just remember from talking to Josh that you and he were very confident after that first ACL recovery. And then what happened the second time? I mean, obviously you'd played a little bit of that season following the first tear and presumably didn't really have any issues. And then, it kind of happened again. So what was the confidence level like, after that first ACL, from the time that, you started training camp and then till the moment that you retore it?
So, I mean, I'd say I was really confident going into 2019. That training camp, I was playing at a very high level. Better than I played before I tore my ACL. We went into a camp where, I was 8 months post-op. I recovered very, very quickly the first time. I would say I was hitting numbers of a fully recovered ACL patient, I guess you could say, in 6 months. So, it was really, working really hard and really felt like I was hitting stride. And then went into the season, went into training camp. We had a new coaching staff. We only had 4 running backs on the roster. And I think my competitive nature going into training camp and going into the football season kind of kind of outweighed the things that I needed to do in order to maintain health in my knees.
Yeah.
I started to focus more on the football side of things, started to spend less of my time rehabbing, and continuing to keep my legs as strong as possible throughout the process. I was in a heat of a very competitive running back position battle. And I think just me thinking in my head that I was Superman, and me thinking that, I was invincible, kind of got in the way, because I was playing at such a high level coming back from a torn ACL. So, went into the 2019 season, really, played great the first 2 games whenever I got the opportunity to get in and get the ball. And then went into the 3rd game and pretty much did the same exact thing I did the first time. I was run down on a kickoff. My knee didn't necessarily buckle the second time, but I felt a little pop in my knee. Again, no pain, jogged off the field, actually went back in the game and threw a block for one of my teammates. But came off the field, did the same thing as last time, put on a brace, was cutting on the sideline. Really, felt like I, just didn't feel right. And then, pulled myself out of the game again, got an MRI, was told, I partially tore my ACL. And this is the part that, people don't necessarily know, is I only partially tore it the second time. But, my surgeon, luckily was, the head surgeon for the Baltimore Ravens. So she pretty much told me that if I had any aspirations to play in the NFL, my knee right now would not clear medical exams. So she was like, whether it's now or later, you're going to have to get it done. She was like, we possibly could put a brace on you and you may be able to play out the rest of the season. But, ultimately I decided to not do that and just get the surgery over with. Then so I got that surgery done. A week after that surgery, I caught an infection in my knee, that caused another surgery to go in there and clean out my knee. Was on IV antibiotics for a month, had a PICC line that went into my arm close to my heart. And I was doing IV antibiotics for a whole month to make sure that the infection was completely out of my knee. And, from there just began the climb again in the rehab process. Went back with Josh and the Maryland med staff, like I talked about earlier. There was, a little bit more dialogue between them on how we could improve the process this time around. How, what components did we need to add? And, I'll let Josh, be the guy to speak on those components. But, overall, I think, there was just, more time the second time around to be able to better, fit my needs in terms of rehab. So.
And I remember Josh had told me that it was a partial tear, and I'd forgotten until you said it again here. So correct me if I'm wrong. It seems like you got the diagnosis that it was a partial tear, but your surgeon said, if you want to play in the NFL, you're going to have to get this redone anyway. So I admire kind of the foresight and the confidence that you tore your ACL for the second time. And prior to that, you hadn't, except for that season where you tore it the second time, you hadn't had a ton of rotation at running back. So here you are after your second ACL tear, and you're thinking after 2 games, like you're thinking about the NFL already. Is that was kind of your mindset?
Yeah. I mean, so I was always thinking about the NFL when I was in college, because, I was, blessed enough to be able to play with 4 NFL running backs who are currently
you had a deep rotation there.
Deep running back room. So I was able to see, I was pretty much, what I tell people is that I was in an NFL running back room since I was 18 years old. I have one friend of mine who plays on the Jets, 2 running backs who play for the Steelers, another one who plays for the Washington football team. And, we all competed every single day. So, me being able to compete with these guys that I knew were playing at the next level gave me the confidence in myself to know that I was just as good as them. Why not me? Kind of deal. So the NFL was always on my mind. it just, took a lot of time for me to finally get the opportunity to be able to show, what I could do on the field.
Yeah, I mean, you make it sound so simple, but that's a very mature response. I mean, there wasn't even after that second tear, it wasn't like, hey, why am I really doing this? Like that didn't enter your mind. It was just like, hey, what do we have to do next? Let's achieve the mission.
Yeah, mentally it was definitely tough because you went through the whole process the first time and everything you went through.
You know how much it sucks after you already did it.
Sucks. I don't wish it upon anybody.
Yeah.
But you really, you just keep the goal in mind that you always, wanted. You know that you're good enough. You know that you can come back from it and be better than you were before. Because I did that once and I proved that to myself that I could do that. So obviously, there's the mourning process mentally when you re-tear it again. That one I think would hurt more than the second one, just because it was a re-tear and it was something that you just had to go through again. But at the end of the day, when I got over that, it was lasered in on what I needed to do to improve the process from the first time, and make the adjustments that were needed.
Yeah, and I think regardless of the fact that you're, Josh's brother, like that's a model patient athlete in terms of like these are the kind of people that as physical therapists we want to work with. Like if you have the mindset that like, okay, I'm going to give myself a couple of days to mourn and feel bad about this, and then like it's then it's a job that like, your job's to get better. Those are like the best people to work with. Now for you, Josh, obviously this is devastating for you. It's your brother, your second ACL tear, and you also helped rehab him the first time. And there's so many variables that go into this, and I think it's natural that like people like us feel responsible when this stuff happens. How much of it for you was like, oh, like I let Jake down, even though it's not your fault? And again, there's so many variables, but I remember like we even talked privately, and you're like, here's the stuff that we did. What do you think? And I'm kind of like, look, I mean, none of us are going to do things totally in an identical fashion, but I go to rehab to perform, and to you for education and to kind of audit myself. And I consider you guys and you thought leaders in the field for ACL rehab. And it's like, I don't really know what you could have done differently. It reminds me, in the military, when I was in the military, there was a saying that the enemy has a say too. And you could have the best training plan. You could do everything right going into a mission, and in this case, like football and the environment, like that's the enemy. Like it has a say in what goes on. So for you, Josh, like how did you kind of compartmentalize that and deal with that mentally, knowing that like now your brother's got to go through this again, and knowing that the cool part is that he trusted you to do it again, which he should have, but we're all human, and it's very easy to doubt somebody after something like that. What was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I can frame this up a little bit as well, the first time, and I'm saying this looking back on it, and so viewing it obviously in the rearview mirror, but when the first time it happened, there was a lot going on at the University of Maryland with regards to the medical staff. They had just gone through losing one of Jake's teammates within the past year. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of chaos kind of going on, and I would say pretty comfortably that there might have been a little bit more siloing even within the athletic department itself with regards to, say, AT staff, the PT that was coming on a contract basis outside to their particular place, and then strength and conditioning. So outside of some conversational challenges, maybe that first time, I think there were certain things going on in which maybe there was a less cohesive rehab model during that first time period. So I think that's something that, we just didn't have to deal with the second time around. Being able to look back on that first situation and look at certain things in which I honestly just didn't have awareness over. So, and I'm mentioning these particular things because yes, when the second time did happen, you almost feel like guilty. You're like sitting here and you're like, gosh, I felt great. Like for him, like he was stronger than he'd ever been. He was running faster on the catapult, like GPS monitoring system than he had ever run. We had been able to do some amazing things, at least with regards to a battery of return to sport testing. But there were some things that I just didn't know that were going on throughout the process, because at the end of the day, I was not spending the majority of my week with him. There were other people that were spending the majority of my week with him. And at least from what it sounded like, there were still challenges with regards to the mesh of the sports medicine staff during that process, and rightfully so. There's a lot going on. You're having reporters and all kinds of outside things going on. There's lawsuits going on. So there was just a lot of different things and different dynamics that were going on during that time period. And this, second period after, auditing, I'm like shooting you, and I still have the document to this day where I'm going through all of the different things. I've got numbers, I've got things that we've checked off, things that were done, and then a list of areas for improvement. And I think that going into the second process, we were probably more informed about some of the different challenges. I think there was a little bit more of a sense of urgency among all parties involved to make sure that there was more conversation being had, that there was more synergy, that people were being much more transparent about what exactly they were doing when it was their time, quote unquote. And then when you talk about just having the opportunity, honestly, that I think was a huge blessing, where he came home, he was forced home. And I mean, Jake, we probably spent 6 to 7 days together. And some days he was doing 2-a-days when we started getting into return to run mode, where he was on a running program every other day, because we knew that we wanted to build up his cumulative load earlier. And then if we talk about training camp, right, and we mentioned the catapult and the GPS monitoring system that he had, there were conversations and certain things, both objectively and subjectively, that were mentioned and that were brought up. And you're juggling this with an athlete who has a new head coach, a new running back coach, and a new offensive coordinator. You're trying to push the envelope a little bit, because he knows that if he's not ready for training camp, that he's probably all but written off for his senior season, right? So there were just a lot of different things that I think were going on if we sit back now and we kind of unpack what that first process was like, that we didn't have to worry about nearly as much, or if at all, during the second time period.
Yeah, and it's interesting that those are your debrief items, because I think as like professionals, we obsess about like the things that we can control, quad strength, hop tests, running progressions. And you did those things, but what you're talking about, what you seem to think the main debrief item was the things that you couldn't control, the communication among all the players, because you're not like, in as professionals, physical therapists, we don't have 24-hour control over athletes. And it's like looking at that bigger picture, and the communication is often the hardest thing to ensure is done properly, because there's humans involved and there's silos, and there needs to be, kind of a conductor of the orchestra. And a lot of times that doesn't happen. So obviously you kind of touched on that. Was there anything, Josh, for you, where you felt like on maybe a tactical level you would have done differently, or were the main debrief items really just like the communication piece and what went on once Jake got back to training camp?
I'm going to try my best to kind of roll through my checklist, but one of the things that you always hear is the 9-month mark. I mean, we literally were pushing the envelope to get him back to training camp prior to the 9-month mark, knowing that some people in the 69-month range do well. But then when you couple the fact that there's 4 running backs for a training camp in which the average is 9 to 10, his workload in terms of that spike went up immediately. And before that season, and for most of his college career, he was an every special teams guy. So you're talking about a running back who's taking double the reps because you just don't have enough bodies at camp, and doing special teams, him thinking that he needs to do this on a psychological level, the objective data putting him in the top 5 of almost every single practice, and sometimes at the highest with regards to his overall player load. So I think that in itself, training camp in itself, you're managing, and we can have this conversation here where he is having conversations. My knee's sore. My groin is a little bit sore, where you're getting these subjective, kind of reporting, so to speak, of, hey, is he tolerating this well, on top of that objective data? So you're trying your best, because once again, you have an athlete, it's his senior season. He is under the expectation that if he does not get back and prove that he can play at a certain level during training camp, that he will be kind of relegated to a backup role the entire season. If we take things even further back, looking at what the demands of training camp were, I think the hard part for me was not knowing all the time of what was going on in other sessions. Yeah. So the amount of cumulative load and the strain and stress that was placed on him, I didn't have control of. I didn't know what he was doing conditioning wise. I didn't know what loads he was lifting. I didn't know what activities he was doing. I would kind of get these general, you know, and to no fault of him, I would kind of get a general explanation of kind of what was going on, but it was challenging to get on the phone. And once again, I don't want to, I'm not kind of redirecting and pointing the finger around. There was a lot of things going on at the University of Maryland. I think there were certain challenges. I think you had people that maybe were a little bit more in defensive positions with regards to what had just happened with one of the athletes. And also sometimes people go, who's this outsider? Like, don't tread on my turf, so to speak. And then you and I know both, when you're talking about 120 athletes and sometimes being short-staffed with regards to your time and attention with them versus an environment where he comes home and it's me and him 6 days a week. I'm able to check in every day. I'm able to see how things are going. I'm able to take into account everything that's done over the course of a session. I'm able to plan his week out. We're able to, you know, repetitively check in. So the dynamics in itself were very, very, very different. And one of the things that we did focus on was building up his load at a higher rate, way faster than we did the second time. And I just say that knowing that he communicated to me that we had done a lot more work, so to speak, during those early time periods. But my job was to build up his touch points. So to make him a little bit of a runner, so to speak, during that early time period after which he was cleared to run. So he was some days, to be quite honest, doing 2-a-day sessions where we would spend some time in the morning and I would send him with something that he would be doing at the track later in the day, just to build up load. And I know everybody talks about acute, chronic, you know, workload and you know, ratio and this, that, and the other, but looking at one particular thing and imagining that there was probably too sharp of a spike when it came to what the demands of training camp were, and the fact that there was just some uncertainty about whether or not that was a very, very sharp increase. I would say outside of that, we know that he was beyond the 9-month mark. So you talk about the time checkbox being checked. He got surgery at an earlier time than he did the previous year. So he was able to do certain things at earlier stages. We were more aggressive with regards to just getting the reps of the ligament and the reps of the tendinous side of things at earlier time periods. And I think that having an athlete that, to be quite honest, becomes even more self-aware. He's becoming more self-aware of how his body responds. He, already had certain inherent qualities in which I would argue that he is a very professional person, but I think he just took them up to a whole nother level. So you had an athlete who was continuing to discover what worked for them, going through that self-regulation piece on his own, him sometimes coming back with very, very beneficial feedback to me that I probably wouldn't have gotten from a lot of people. And then I think the fact that we just got, and I can't emphasize how important this probably is, but when you get somebody and you're working with them and you're one-on-one with them for that block of time, you really don't worry about stones that are unturned. So I just think the fact that there were a lot more variables that were controlled, there was a lot less uncertainty. It really made this rehab process that much better. And once again, you have an athlete that ran even faster than he's ever ran when he came back. His strength per body weight ratios are off the charts. His body composition is better than it's ever been. So it's kind of crazy to say this, but I've had, multiple conversations with different people, but he is an example that the ACL should not be a career ender. If anything, depending on the athlete and the individual, it could be an opportunity to work on things that you've maybe never had a chance to work on. And the other thing that we added in this second time is we added in position specific work earlier. So we got him with a running back specific coach who I would have regular conversations with about things that he was able to do, the level in which he was able to do them at. And I think, if I'm speaking at least for the first year, and Jake can correct me if I'm wrong, he was introduced to running back specific work definitely much later the second time. So once again, you're getting touch points, you're getting reps, so to speak, of that ligamentization process that's going on with the graft. You're building the athlete's sport-specific movement capabilities at an even earlier level than say we did the first time as well.
And then Jake, for you, because Josh touched on like the self-awareness piece. After the first ACL rehab, you're coming off a surgery, and you still basically, like, I think we're either leading the team or like in the top 10 percentile on the team in your GPS activity in practice between running back and special teams. And you come off the second ACL tear, and I'm sure you feel like you have even more to prove. So how did you go about kind of, now that you have more self-awareness, being able to balance, like, okay, my knee is sore, like maybe today isn't the day in practice to be leading the team and in whatever high velocity runs or change of directions or yardage, whatever metrics you're tracking. And was that something that, like, you have to go to the coaching staff yourself and say, hey, I want you guys to throttle me back in practice? Or was that something that the medical staff was tracking, and they looked at your, whatever objective data they were tracking, and they said, okay, like, because in an ideal world, you wouldn't have to ask. You would be held back because people could look at the data, but it's very hard as an athlete when you feel like you have so much to prove and you want to get back to say, I want to do less that second time around.
Yeah. I mean, so when I say, like, when I go back and say, like, the dialogue was better between me and my strength and conditioning med staff as well. We actually, for this past year, we hired a full-time sports analytics guy. So he pretty much, we'd have these catapult GPS systems, right? So, some days where, I came in and my knee wasn't feeling all right. It was, just sore, whatever. He would take note of that, and he would just watch my GPS on his computer, live data while we were at practice. And there'd be some days where if I hit a certain point, he would come over to our running backs coach and say, he's done. He's done. So, I think, overall, from, like we said earlier, from just the strength staff to the PTs to everybody involved, there was increased dialogue and increased importance on, the actual, the live data that we had as well in terms of workload. That was something that was big. We even got more into workload this year, where guys who weren't necessarily, rehab guys are also used the catapult systems, where if they had a high workload during a game, they would get off the next practice because their workload was so high. So, being able to hire a sports analytic guy to be able to look at the data and, be able to, preach it and be able to, put it out there for people to understand who couldn't really, understand it, was definitely a big, help for us. And I was able to come back from, my second ACL, and, people, I would say around the building, respected me saying my knee hurt a little bit, you know what I mean? Where it was like, oh, my knee's aching. They know that, like, because of who I am and, how I am as a person, that I'm not just BSing. I'm not just saying, oh, my knee's bothering me just to get out of a practice or whatever. Like, I was actually a little sore and needed to be, taken, take a couple reps off here or there. But overall, I mean, yeah, you juggle going back and forth between having to prove a lot, but also trying to be smart. And that's something that I think, I was able to enhance in terms of the dialogue with the coaching staff in all aspects the second go around than I was the first time.
Yeah, and I think you kind of earned that political and social capital just by rehabbing your knee a second time and, wanting to go through that process. Like, it's clear that you're not the kind of person that's looking to scurve or, get out of practicing more. And the whole point of data is to kind of save us from ourselves. So the fact that oftentimes like you didn't have to be the one to say, I'm not feeling great. Like if whatever, threshold your sports analytics person had to say like, okay, this is enough. Now you don't have to be the one to go to the coach and say it, which is great because, it creates less kind of like awkwardness and anxiety for you having to do that. So you go through the second ACL rehab, and oh, by the way, now it's like COVID. You're not sure if you're going to have a season. There's so much ambiguity as to what the schedule is going to be, and you've got, it's your senior year. You've got like one more year to kind of prove that you're an NFL worthy running back. So, yeah, I mean, what was that senior season like in terms of? Did you even know that you were going to have a senior season? When was it clear to you that okay, like this is going to happen, but now you've got different travel restrictions and all these things and less games. You had opportunity to prove yourself, but not as much as you would have with a normal season. So how did you make the best out of that opportunity?
I mean, the season itself was just an up and down roller coaster. You went through went through the whole summer doing summer workouts. You're anticipating a season. All the signs say that, we're going to have a season. Then, we got 3 days into training camp and, the commissioner of the Big Ten pulls the plug on the season. I think he pulled the plug in hopes that all the other conferences would pull the plug as well. But, only one other did, and 3 of them were able, to continue practicing and played initially. And then I think, the first few months that we were canceled, like it was definitely hard, especially when, week 1 came around and you see all these other teams playing and you question like, why are they playing and we can't? And then the more and more, we began to go into the season, the more and more pushback, I guess, the Big Ten got for their decision. So you kept having a feeling in your gut that, they were going to bring back the season, just because there was so much pushback and so, much media just, disgust for the decision that they made. And, it happened, everything happened that, they brought it back late. They put, crazy 21-day rule, for COVID. When all the other conferences were about 10 days when, return to play. So, we had a shortened season. And then if you got COVID, it was pretty much like a third of your season was cut short because you contracted the virus. So it was definitely an interesting year. Here at, the University of Maryland, we were able to play our first 3 games pretty smooth, not a lot of COVID cases. And then after our 3rd game, we got hit, and we got hit pretty hard for the rest of the season. I contracted COVID, was out for 21 days. Should have played against Indiana, was healthy enough to play against them. But the Big Ten rules kept me out. The Saturday of the Indiana game that we played was day 19 out of 21. So if the game was magically on Monday, I could have played. Then, we missed a few games before that. We then had another game canceled on us by Michigan because they had COVID cases on their team. Was able to get one more game in against Rutgers later in the year when we were missing, half of our starters to COVID. And then the last game of the year, we had another wave of COVID hit our team and we had to cancel that game. So as a team, we only played 5 games. But me personally, I only got to play 4. And then, making them, like you said, about making the most out of the opportunity that was given. It's just something that I became accustomed to in my 5 years at Maryland. Being in the running back room that I was, going through the ACL injuries, going through a COVID year, I was forced to make the most of every single chance that I got to carry the ball or be on the field. Because, just the way my college career went, I wasn't a guy who, was given a silver spoon and was the starter for 3 years and was able to, find a niche in a team. I had to, work my way, and I found a niche my first 2 years when it came to, special teams, but then, was trying to find my niche as a running back. Finally felt like I found it this year, got cut short, but in the games that I played, I, made the most of every single opportunity I could. And it's just something that I continue to preach to myself, was that, whatever happens, happens. And, at the end of the day, you just don't want to have any regrets on what you could have done better. So, for me, it was just going in there every single game like it was the last one you were going to play.
Yeah. And I mean, the fact that you really have 4 games and you had such a monster season that I forgot that you only played 4 games, because it just seemed like the totality of it was so much more enormous. But you really had like 4 games of tape, and you're still, after 2 ACL tears, and you're still an NFL prospect. So and I remember, because ever since I met you, I'd go on ESPN when Maryland had a game and look at like the stat line. And like this year I'm seeing like, 8 carries for 200 yards, and I'm screenshotting it and sending it to Josh. And I'm like, what is this guy? What's this guy doing? And I mean, obviously you've got a lot of confidence in yourself, but is that what you expected after 2 ACL tears to be, just basically just lighting up the league? I mean, I know it's easy to look back now and say, yeah, like that's what I did, but is that really what you expected to happen?
Honestly, yes. And that's just solely because I knew the running back room that I was competing with every single day. I was with guys who lit up the Big Ten every single year. Ty Johnson was 1,000-yard rusher. Anthony McFarland, another 1,000-yard rusher in the Big Ten. Javon Leake hit 800 yards last year when he was splitting carries with Anthony McFarland. I've been surrounded by guys who have succeeded at this level, and competed with them every single day, and knew that, I was good enough. I just needed somebody to give me the opportunity. And Coach Loxley and the offensive staff this year, finally gave me a shot. And like I said, just taking advantage of the opportunity that was given.
Yeah. And I mean, normally, like when I do these podcasts, there's like a very kind of natural ending point and closure to the recording and the episode. But for you and your family, I feel like this is just the beginning of the story. Like there is, the story's still being written. And I'm just so excited for both of you and your family. And I mean, just the unique relationship that you have to be able to share this personally, but you have a unique relationship. There's also like a professional component there. And I think that, the contribution that Josh has had to your athletic development makes the personal relationship more meaningful. So, I mean, I thank you both for coming on, and I'm just excited to see what's next for you and your family.
Appreciate you, Doug. Appreciate you having us on, man.
Yeah. Thank you both.
Doug, appreciate it. It's kind of crazy. This came full circle ever since you met him, Derek Hanson's course, when I brought him up. I don't know how many summers ago that was, but
that was when you could do things with other people. Yeah.
Yeah. It was a long time ago, but nonetheless, he's evolved a lot over the years, and we're very excited to see what the next couple of weeks holds for him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we'll be following you closely, and I'm sure hopefully everybody else does too that's listening. All right. Good night, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Resilient Performance Podcast. As a thank you for listening, please use promo code PODCAST for 10% off our professional development resources at resilientperformance.com. Also, make sure to sign up for our mailing list to receive exclusive content and promotions.